Hey guys, and welcome back. So, the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae is called the Blue House, colloquially here in Korea. It's similar to the White House, where the president lives and works. But with the new Yoon Seok-yeol presidency, the president-elect who was just recently elected by a very thin margin, he has pledged to not live there and to not even have his office there in order to reduce this authoritarian imperial style presidency. And we're going to go over why that's probably a good idea. So Cheong Wa Dae, Cheong basically means blue. And if you see the current location of Cheong Wa Dae, it is behind Gyeongbok Palace, Gyeongbokgung Palace, and Gyeongbokgung Palace is essentially Korea's forbidden city. That was the seat of power, that was the royal palace of the Joseon dynasty. And if you look at it right now, you see the palace, and then up in the foothills behind this palace is essentially the modern palace. And if you look at that structure, just even feng shui wise, it's still in a very palace-like position. And when you go there, it is like a fortress. Like, you can drive along behind the Gyeongbok Palace, like our forbidden city, and in between the beginning of Cheong Wa Dae, and it is guarded, and it almost feels as if you're not even allowed to walk there or drive there. Once you're inside, it's a 62-acre complex. It's beautiful with so many gardens, and like the trees in Korea are like highly prized. So you know, like every country has some sort of like natural thing. Well, trees. Those trees are so well maintained and like, you know, super expensive. Like if you wanted one of those trees transported like from like some great part of the countryside to like your yard, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars or something crazy like that. There's like a market in those trees. But why is it called Cheong Wa Dae? Like, why was it even blue? Well, apparently the blue tile in the ancient royal times, like in the Joseon dynasty or the Goryeo dynasty, which was right before. Goryeo is basically where Korea, the anglicized word, came from. Apparently blue tiles was like super status symbol, like super only the kings could use. Apparently it was like way more expensive to make to get that blue color. And one source even said that like at one point like 20 pieces of the blue tile could buy a cow. And if you're measuring things in cows, like back then a cow was like big, you know, like that is like ridiculous. Like, why would you make the tiles when you could get a cow? And so apparently they were supposed to make Gyeongbok Palace all blue as well, but it was just like way too expensive. Anyhow, so the blue has some sort of like regal, imperial type of connotation. And even when you have the delegations come from other countries, I didn't know they did like a whole kind of like song and dance parade for the motorcade. So there was one clip that I'll show you about Donald Trump coming to Cheong Wa Dae, to the Blue House. And they even had the old imperial people like dressed up and play the instruments and then like kind of be like old royal guards. So in that sense, you kind of get the, like, we just can't peel off this palace imperial type of connotation, especially when you're talking about the Blue House. Now, why that is a problem is because we live in an active democracy. Well, we say we do, but the president in South Korea does have outsized powers constitutionally, and also where the problem is the soft power. It's the essential like acceding to the emperor powers that just because of his position, people give to him because they are scared. Why? Because that place can be weaponized. It is like a dictator or emperor's dream to have essentially the emperor type of power, but being able to manipulate the modern legal and justice system to enforce your fear. That has been a huge problem in this constant struggle here in Korea between authoritarianism and democracy, because now authoritarianism literally can hide under threats of weaponizing the justice system. It should be independent, right? But in Korea, there is just still this hierarchical system where you have to obey the command of your elders, especially if you're in the same school network or if you're in the same office network, like somebody who comes above you. There's like a huge, it's basically like a mafia, and you have to either play along and move up, or you don't, you get extricated and you get demolished. Like people will weaponize and try to just kick you to the curb. And so this system essentially allows for the presidential office to make threats, literally make threats, like so for to corporations, say like, well, if you don't want to be audited, if you don't want to go through some, really arduous investigation, then donate to such and such foundation, which is going to be used by the people who are either the president themselves or their cronies, where eventually that money starts to flow back. But that's would probably even be the best case scenario, just paying a bribe. Basically, that system where basically like you kind of feel like you're an emperor is a problem when you have a dictator, but where it's even more of a problem, and where we have seen recently this has gotten leaders into trouble, is your entourage. Are the people close to the president who use the power of this empire to then even act independently and extract favors, produce threats, and get this sense of hubris, like they're all powerful, and create a lot of havoc for a lot of people. Now, so Yoon Seok-yeol says that like, okay, I'm gonna avoid that drama. Well, probably good, because that thing has already been tainted by his wife saying that like, oh, I'm gonna put a shaman in the guest house and then we're going to like, go to them for consultations. So like not just on personal levels, but for like policy. So that's good that they're probably going to avoid that image, but still, I bet that shaman is somewhere in a basement or probably in a palace of their own, because they make money. And so they are thinking, at first they were thinking of going into Gwanghwamun. So like it's kind of like really good feng shui, because you have Cheong Wa Dae right at the mountains, then you have the Gyeongbok Palace, which is now a tourist site, and then right south of it is Gwanghwamun Square, and that is essentially one of the most prestigious places to have a business. And there's a government complex there as well, but because of security concerns, they most likely will not go there. Moon Jae-in also had pledged to get out of Cheong Wa Dae because it's too closed off, and he wanted to go into the Gwanghwamun government complex over there as well, but there were too many security concerns. It's not safe enough to house a president. Also, part of the problem with being in the Blue House as the president is that your official residence with the official office is way too far, even within the complex of Cheong Wa Dae, because it's 62 acres to get to your staff. So there's too much back and forth. And remember, there was the whole thing of like, where's our president during the Seoul ferry? When President Park, all of her lackeys, when they were being investigated, said like, oh, she was there, she wasn't missing, and they were just making up timelines and making up reports. And then you saw her later on in the day, like when after everybody passed away, she's like, oh, well, can't we just get them, life jackets? And people were like, girl, they've been sunk for like its close of business. They sunk in like 9:30 a.m. So that place is big. It's inefficient. So Moon Jae-in actually moved his office out of that official royal area and went to where his staff was. So it's sort of like, I believe, like in the White House, there's like another building that's right adjacent for a lot of the staffers if you're not like right in the West Wing. But even there, see, like you're right in the West Wing next to the Oval Office. Now, speaking of such, one Korean architect said that the Oval Office is actually such good design for democracy. He said that because it's oval, it, number one, creates two focal points, and one is where the president's desk is, so that is a focal point of power, but because there's windows that go into the garden, that makes it more approachable. And then also the second focal point is actually those sofas in the middle or towards the other side of the room, which basically signifies that whoever the president brings in to the room for a discussion, they are valid, important, and they're being heard. And so then when you see a lot of those photos of the president talking to their staff, they're not just only sitting behind the desk and being like, report to me, like kind of like a Putin, or even kind of like the way the Korean president has the office set up. It's more of like a conference room, a table, and apparently because it's oval, you feel included and comfortable in that room. So dialogue happens. You get the real information from your reports. You're not being like held at gunpoint by like Putin saying like, only tell me what I want to hear. They say like even in the Blue House, when you go into the room where the president sits, it's intimidating. It is a square shaped, so there are a lot of angles, and basically the only power position is the president where they are sitting. So you're basically kind of like, if you've seen the Korean dramas and you see the ministers come in, they're like, oh, hello, emperor, this is the latest report or something like that. It kind of has that sort of feeling. And then they said that like even people who work there, when they come into the room to see the president at his desk in the Blue House in Korea, that the distance actually in reality is not that far, but the perceived distance is really long because it's an intimidating space. So where they're probably thinking of going is the Defense Ministry building in Yongsan, which is kind of near Itaewon, and it's right next to the American Army base that's now currently transferring more south of Seoul. And I hope they fix, first of all, it's always a traffic jam there. That is the worst designed area where you're making a left turn. It takes forever and cars are just bumping and crashing into each other. This is horrible. So if you're gonna go there, you better fix that area first for all the drivers and then not block it off. Or if you do block it, fix the roads. I mean, that's another topic for us here on Seoulite TV, but the road design in Korea needs a lot of reform. So that place apparently has like the helicopter pads, it has a bunker, and it is equipped for security sufficiently to house the president and his office. Also, there apparently is room there, and so it would take minimal redesign to accommodate the president. And also, it seems as if there is room because the President-elect Yoon Seok-yeol wants to reduce the staff of the Blue House. And he's like, how I recommended in the last video that he should decentralize, make the people who are actually doing the work of Korea be more empowered to make the decisions. But what I found very interesting is that he wants to essentially eliminate the secretariat pool. So these are not the cabinet appointments of like the ministries. This is essentially the coterie of special advisors that have always come in with every president, and they're called senior secretaries of different divisions. And he in particular said that he wanted to get rid of the senior presidential secretary for civil affairs. Why did he do that? I'm almost speechless. Because this is a very smart move, because do you know who really got President Park Geun-hye impeached? The real person that got her into the hot water? Yes, we all have reported that her best friend, the one that is like somewhat tied to like a cult and who embezzled money and tried to pay for her daughter's horse with Samsung bribes. Yes, she was the face of the reason why President Park Geun-hye got impeached. But she did not come along into that story until probably like scene 4. The person that really, I believe, is responsible for President Park Geun-hye getting impeached was her senior secretary for civil affairs, and that was Woo Byung-woo. This dude got a little bit too big for his britches. He was even called like the real power in the Blue House. People were calling him emperor. He got really upset and upset the wrong people that put the dominoes in motion that eventually led to like, oh my god, her best friend is so shady, and then people flew with the best friend in terms of the charges that led to President Park getting impeached, but it was really this senior presidential secretary for civil affairs. And apparently he was supposed to be in charge of like making sure other people weren't corrupt, but this dude. So why was he already? He was apparently like a genius whiz kid when he was younger, and then he became a prosecutor, and he worked up all the way to the head of like, you know, being in the prosecution's office. And to make the long story short, essentially, he was involved in bribery, and in order to stop a media investigation, he launched an attack at the editor-in-chief of the Chosun-ilbo. The Chosun-ilbo is essentially like the premier newspaper that leans conservative. They're supposed to be on the same team. And probably other things happened. Like if somebody in the media that's supposed to be that close to you, and we already know there's a lot of big collusive ties, if somebody is going after you on the same team, you probably have done other things to piss them off. And this guy thought that he can do anything. And years before he entered into the Blue House, he had been involved in some legal suits with some very prominent corporations and used his power to stifle the investigations, get rid of the investigations. And then the big thing that the Chosun-ilbo, the newspaper, was trying to investigate and nab him on was like, oh, we see how you got bribed by a software company. So his sister, the senior presidential secretary, Woo Byung-woo, his sister had inherited some land apparently, and they were having trouble selling it, and this corporation bought it way over market price. This is how you do one, you know, like if you stick around here, you'll see how to do all sorts of corruption. So, you know, if you're like kind of like a dictator in training, yeah, learn from Korea. So this software company got this land and sold it later and didn't even do anything with it. That's why it was really obvious that it was shady, because if they really needed the land and paid over market value, then like, you know, why didn't they do anything with it? And then they just, you know, sold it off later, and they probably, you know, thought that the difference in the price was the real cost of the bribe. And so I think he got like $120 million for it. And so this newspaper usually, you know, I think would not go after him, but he probably did something that hasn't even been reported that would, you know, that pissed them off. And then so what he did was he attacked directly the editor-in-chief. And I think that essentially set in, basically saying like, oh, this editor-in-chief took a luxurious vacation as a bribe from a corporation, Daewoo. And he was trying to make them the target and move public opinion in the opposite direction against this newspaper that was trying to uncover his corruption. So you see how like he thought he was so powerful that he could just go after the Joseonilbo, but I don't know about that, because if you look at like who owns the Joseonilbo, who are they connected to, even if you were, bigwig in the prosecution, I don't know if you can really go up against that. And obviously, he couldn't. And what that did was that started to set the ball in motion for then other news outlets to then investigate more. And also the whistleblower came in. The boy toy of Cheong-yeol, the best friend, who's also spending a lot of time in this presidential palace doing all sorts of stuff, like where she wasn't supposed to be in part of the government, but you can't really see it because it's so guarded, was so upset because he was a boy toy, but then now he became like an assistant who had to walk the dogs and get abused by this woman. And so he essentially, it's being alleged, gave this tablet PC with all this evidence of like, oh, normal people shouldn't have this type of government level documents, and look at these speeches. This best friend did the editing of the speeches and overrode people who are actually in the president's staff. And so JTBC, the news organization that kind of like blew the lid on this tablet PC that had all the evidence that they found. They said like, oh, we found it somewhere. Found it somewhere. So basically, people are saying the boy toy gave it to them, but they had to say like, oh, we found it somewhere, because legally, I think if you just find it somewhere, you can use it. And so this presidential office can create this atmosphere where once you're in as one of these people who has the ear of the president, you can start doing all sorts of business and messes that maybe even the president is not 100% aware about. And they have to then eventually try to bail you out and then get dragged down. So I think what Yoon Seok-yeol had seen from President Park Geun-hye is that, oh my gosh, these senior presidential secretaries, they think they're the emperor because they're here in this modern blue-tiled palace. And what if they do something and then I have to end up in jail just like President Park? You never know, especially if, his wife is not going to be in control of herself and she's just too tempted to open up her own foundation and then basically have somebody just like Woo Byung-woo, who is tied to the prosecutors, and basically then as a team go to all the major conglomerates in Korea and be like, you want to get investigated? You want to get investigated? Really? You want that? You want that? If you want to avoid it, just donate to this foundation. And so if the wife starts pulling stuff like that, then who has to ultimately go to jail? It's gonna be the husband, the president. He probably just like, wife, I don't know, like, I gotta keep my eye on you, and I don't want to go to jail for 30 years because of something you're doing behind my back with other senior presidential secretaries who think that they're the emperor too just because of this blue-tiled building. So most likely they're gonna go to the Ministry of Defense, and a lot of these committees that he's setting up are going to then probably be in lieu of a presidential senior secretary, because that is way too much power and access and kind of like a chokehold for information and a decision-making point. And so he's going to decentralize it to more, he says, like public-private kind of committees. So we'll have to see like how that actually does work in real life. But in any event, I think it does make a lot of sense for him to boldly not live there and also not work there. It does send a strong message. if we didn't have such a culture of corruption, bribery, intimidation, weaponizing our justice system against normal people and even the country's 0.1%, then of course I think you should like work and live in the Blue House. That place is so beautiful, and I mean it is, but it's not even that old though, so it's not like, you know, no tears, no violins. Basically that main house was done in like 1991 or 1993, so it's not like a historical place to, you know, if you wanted to live in a historical place, go a little bit south to the tourist palace and Gyeongbok Palace and then work where there's basically like no solid walls, no heating, no air conditioning. Try that. That'll get you straight real quick. And so it should be, because it is a symbol of Korea. It is a symbol of the, you know, nation's history and pride. But once you get in there, it's like that Lord of the Rings, you know, it's like that my precious, like just can't resist the pull of the power of that place to then do stuff that basically is corrupt. And I think it is a good thing that he will probably want to change the office, and it'll probably start there. Hopefully, maybe they can make an Oval Office with the new redesign. You should check out that YouTube video. That architect, it's a Korean architect, and maybe even hire him to create your office, because after I saw his analysis of that, I was like, dang, wow, that Oval Office is ensuring American democracy. I kid you not. And so if you can make it, hey, we can make interiors in Korea. We can. So why not? Go for it. Go for it, Mr. Yoon, President-elect Yoon. And do not give your wife an office. Don't keep her at home. I still say send her abroad to study, make her get her wish of some prestigious academic degree. That might do everybody a lot of good. All right, guys, what do you think? Do you think that he should move out of the presidential palace or Cheong Wa Dae or the Blue House, or do you think he should just stay there and let's see what more drama that palace politics would bring? Not good for the country, but good for what we talk about. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.